Hi everybody, you've got Rosa with Rosa's Quilted Garden, and I'm here today to show you how I make a t-shirt quilt. This is part two. I'll try to leave a link about part one at the bottom, and I just have a few things just to go over again. Once again, you need to do communication with your client, whoever's asking for this t-shirt quilt. And I've explained that in part one. Then you need to get the t-shirts in and do a kind of a sorting out. You know, the reds and the blues and how many you'll need, depending on the size of the quilt. Then, as I mentioned in my last video, your grid paper and a lead pencil and eraser are your very best friends. So if you figure out what kind of pattern you're going to use, you're more than welcome to use mine. That's 12.5-inch blocks with a 2.5-inch, like a jelly roll strip, 2.5-inch strip in between. And I find those strips in between, it's quite important because it solidifies. It makes it a little bit more squarish and it doesn't stretch as much. We'll put it that way. Because even if you have interfacing, sometimes the interfacing comes off on the t-shirt and it is, well, it's still stretchy. So if you put a 2.5-inch cotton border around your block, it'll help to solidify it a bit. So what you're going to do, once you've done all of this and you figured out how many t-shirts you need and so on and so forth, which ones you're going to use in that, then you start cutting up. So I usually take my 12.5-inch ruler, which I have here. Your standard 12.5-inch ruler. And I give it about maybe 1.5 inches. I cut roughly all around that. I don't make it exactly 12.5-inch, and I'll tell you why in a bit. Then I cut the interfacing, once again 12.5-inch, but I overcut it. Okay, so then when you're ready to put it together, you line it up on the back, of course, and most interfacings, and I'll show you the one that I use here. It's a Pellon, and it's a 845 F as in Frank, and it's lightweight. And once you put it on the fabric, you have to feel. One side's got little nubbies to it. That's the side of the glue, and the other side is completely smooth. So obviously the side of the glue is the side that you put down on the back of the t-shirt. So once it's nicely held down, okay, it's not going anywhere, then you would put your 12.5 ruler on the front of the t-shirt. Try to line up the lettering or the picture, whatever. You know, you look at, is it 1 inch down below, 1 inch, above, or whatever. You line it up properly. That's when you finally do cut it. Okay. Now, one thing about ironing on this, and I've had people say that they have difficulty. It depends on the heat of your iron. If it's not hot enough, of course, the interfacing won't stick on the cotton, or you may have to do it pass over it several times. If it's too hot, the interfacing might start melting. So that's something that you're going to have to gauge yourself. If it's too hot, which is good, it'll stick to it, but it'll melt. What you do is you take a piece of ironing cloth or some kind of cotton or something to protect the iron against that interfacing so it doesn't melt. So you'd have, for example, the t-shirt, the interfacing with the glue side down, and then the ironing cloth, and then you iron. Okay? And once again, make sure that the t-shirt is, the good side is facing down. You don't want to put the interfacing on the good side. Ask me how I know that. I unfortunately did a boo-boo on one of my clients' quilts. Not the one I'm working on, but another one. Okay, so as I said, once all that interfacing is on there, then you trim to 12.5-inch. Now, I mentioned in the last video, if you have a little one, like a little t-shirt emblem or something, logo, that you want to cut, for example, this one here. As you can see, there's a lot of black around it. So what I did is I cut a 12.5-inch black in this case. If your customer wants a white background, well, it would be a white square, whatever. And then I went and trimmed loosely around this little one, okay? And I cut a piece of heat and bond. Now, I like to work with Heat and Bond, the light one. Let me show you what I mean here. Heat and Bond. Here it is. Okay. So that's Heat and Bond light. Now, whatever kind of technique you like to use, I know there's another one. I'm trying to think of the name here quickly. Now, as I was saying, some people prefer to use another kind of adhesive to, to tack down appliques. And the other one is called, I just remembered, it's called Steamacine. And personally, I've worked with Steamacine before, and it made me so frustrated because some of that film, the glue that's behind it, it detached itself from the paper, and it was a nightmare to work with. And I've never had any issues whatsoever with Heat and Bond light. Mind you, even though it's called a light, it's just a little bit thicker than the Steamacine. But it's your personal preference, whichever you feel comfortable with and whichever you get the better results from. That certainly is something to go with. And once you've done this, now you've roughly cut out around that smaller piece, and you've added your Heat and Bond or Steamacine on the back, ironed it down and everything. That's when you take your ruler out and you try to cut out something square or rectangular or however way you want to do it. Iron it down on your 12.5-inch background block, and then you can applique it down. Now, I do a blanket stitch with my sewing machine. If you prefer to do it by hand, you're more than welcome to try that. Or a zigzag. Now, some people will do, I think it's a zigzag stitch, and they shorten the stitches to make it look like a satin stitch. I don't care. I love the look of a satin stitch. Don't get me wrong. If I could have the patience and the time, I would certainly do all my pieces with satin stitch, but I just don't have the patience or the time. And to me, a blanket stitch does the job, and why not? Now, as I said, this is part 2, and I think I'll finish off with a part 3. That'll be done tomorrow. Otherwise, I'd ask you to, well, let me write it down here. Let me show you what I'm asking you to do here. Like, subscribe, and share. And mind you, if you want to put a comment on there, that is nice as well. And once again, I'll try to put the parts down below on my on this video here. Part 1 will be listed there. And of course, if you have any questions, don't be afraid to ask. That's what I'm here for, to try to help you, give you a hand on how to do these t-shirt quilts. That really aren't that complicated. It's just a matter of planning out and prepping and putting them together. You have yourself a great day. Thank you for joining Rosa at Rosa's Quilted Garden. Bye now.